In today's video, we're taking a look at some Montreal Canadian trade rumors, along with a potential deal we might see between the Canucks and the Penguins. Plus, we have some updates to the Dallas Stars coaching situation, an update on New Jersey and their player development department, a signing, and a quick look at the playoffs coming up to the conference finals. We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at here today. First up, let's recap what happened last night in Game 7, the Rangers and Carolina Hurricanes. Of course, the Rangers broke the trend. It was no longer a homer series with the Rangers, the road team, defeating the Carolina Hurricanes 6-2 for the first time. The Carolina Hurricanes lose at home in the 2022 Stanley Cup playoffs, and it really wasn't all that close. The Carolina Hurricanes made a few mistakes early on, got some penalties. Rangers took advantage. It was 2-0 fairly early in the first period. And then they just never really got back in it. Not to mention later on into the game, into the third period, I believe it was, when Antti Raanta got hurt, had to leave the game. So now they're on their third string goaltender. And, it wasn't really fair to him, put him in a bad spot. And Carolina continued to make a few mistakes. He let in a few more goals. And it just snowballed, and it just, Carolina had some pressure at some point. Igor Shesterkin was really good. I don't want to say that Carolina was god-awful or anything like that, because they weren't. They were getting shots, and they were generating offense, but the offense they were generating just wasn't leading to any scoring. Like, it wasn't, the high grade A chances that you would hope for, and Igor was just determined that he was not letting them get back in this game. It's just that simple. Penalties continued to play a role throughout the game as well. And it was all Rangers for the most part. So the Rangers move on to play the Lightning. That'll start tomorrow night, whereas the Western Final gets underway this evening. If you would like a more in-depth preview or my predictions and thoughts on who I think is going to win that series or those series, certainly check out the video I posted on the channel earlier today. I'll place it up here in the YouTube cards with a full preview and prediction on the conference finals. Now, with that happening and the Rangers advancing to the Eastern Conference Final, that also finalizes a trade return in the acquisition of Andrew Copp that they got from the Winnipeg Jets prior to the NHL trade deadline. Of course, they had traded a conditional second-round pick that upgrades to a first if they made it this far in the playoffs. So that first-round pick is now confirmed for the New York Rangers. So they will not have a first rounder this year. That will now belong to the Winnipeg Jets. So I'm sure the Jets are happy to get an extra first round pick. At this point, I'm not so sure the Rangers are too upset about it, given how much success they've had. Clearly, they were okay with that when they made the trade. If they worked out and they were that successful, that they were going to be without it anyway. So, and at this point, it's going to be a pretty late first rounder. So I think it's all fine and dandy for having that much playoff success and getting it to the third round. They're going to have a major test coming up against the Lightning, of course, but you just never know, right? All you can do is do your best, and you have a red-hot goaltender right now who will go head-to-head with the Lightning's red-hot goaltender, and we'll see who can win that battle of the top Russian goalie in the NHL to advance to the Stanley Cup Final. Now, speaking of the Jets, they also made a signing today. Of course, the other day we talked about a large group of prospects that had a deadline coming up here, June the 1st, to be signed or their rights would be relinquished. One of those players gets signed, and it's Winnipeg Jets prospect Tyrell Bauer, who's a 2026 rounder. He's a 6'3", 206-pound right shot defenseman from the Western Hockey League Seattle Thunderbirds. So he gets his entry-level deal that'll kick in next year. He's the only one so far that I've heard of getting a contract, but we're kind of slowly running out of time here. We'll see if anything squeaks in before the deadline passes here. On to some other news as well, some good news, and especially nice to see more opportunity to some really prominent females in the game of hockey. Of course, last year the New Jersey Devils hired Megan Duggan, who's quite a prolific hockey player in her own right, competing at the Olympics and World Championships, and obviously has a very successful career in her own right. And after 1 year, she's now getting a promotion to become the Director of Player Development, and she's going to oversee all organizational plans in this regard, development of staff scheduling, and when it comes to off-ice and on-ice evaluations for all their American Hockey League players, as well as prospects playing in other leagues. So certainly a nice promotion for Megan Duggan. Nice to see her doing a good job, and the Devils are quite pleased this early on in her career there to get a fairly big promotion. Now, of course, we know the Dallas Stars are one of the teams that have a head coaching vacancy, and one of the names that's surfacing because of comments from the owner is Travis Green. He appears to be a candidate there with the Stars organization. Now, they were also one of the teams mentioned in the Barry Trotz sweepstakes. Difficult to say which direction they'll go. It's believed that they're going to speak to a variety of people in this position here. So not to say that Green is a slam dunk or anything like that. We really don't know how he compares or what his odds are. But Travis Green, former Vancouver Canucks bench boss, is definitely a candidate for the vacancy in Dallas. And I wouldn't be shocked to find out that he was also a candidate for some other positions. We have vacancies in Chicago and Detroit, Winnipeg, and also in Winnipeg as well. It's believed that Scott Arniel will be joining their coaching staff in some capacity, most likely as an assistant, regardless of who they name as a head coach. So we'll see where that goes as well. Now, of course, on to some trade talk here for today and some updates and some other regards. Let's start with the Montreal Canadiens because it's not all trade talk when it comes to the Habs, but Ken Hughes, the GM of the Habs, did have immediate availability today, mostly talking about prospects and things because of the draft combine, but he did spend some time answering questions about the future of Carey Price. So here is the latest update on Price. Of course, we're almost to June here. The draft is just over a month away. Free agency is only about 6 weeks away, or not even quite that. So at this point, Carey Price at the end of the season did see another knee specialist in Pittsburgh, and it's still not clear yet if he's going to be able to play. Now, if you remember, after playing some games near the end of the season, he did travel with the team to New York and saw a specialist there too. So this kind of leads us to think that he's seeking multiple opinions. And I'm no doctor, and I'm not going to make presumptions, but it just typically, when you don't get the news you want, is usually when you seek additional opinions to try to see if there's a way to make things work. But Ken Hughes was also kind of asked too, when do you want to know? Ideally, do you need to know by the draft? And he said, no, the draft is not really a critical date for us. The more critical date would be the opening of free agency on July the 13th. Because certainly if Carey Price is not going to be able to play, and we know that for sure, then that's obviously creates a long-term injury reserve window that we can place his contract there, and it'll allow us to do more things in free agency. Clearly, they'll need to find and decide on a goaltending tandem. We know Jake Allen is under contract next year. He should be, obviously his injury he had at the end of the year wasn't real serious, so he should be fine, recovered and ready to go in the fall. But who will be there with him? Will it be, if it's not Price, will they go with a youngster? I don't think Caden Primo really doesn't look like he's ready yet to me. So I do think the future of Carey Price definitely impacts the future of Samuel Montembeault. I mean, many people feel that he did well enough to earn himself another opportunity, another contract with Montreal. So if they end up going with Jake Allen and Samuel Montembeault as the goalie tandem next year, then that means that they don't really need to go shopping for a goalie if they have confidence that Montembeault is their guy. I guess we don't know that 100%, but that's kind of the assumption we're going with right now. And of course, they can then place Price's contract on LTIR, and it will allow them to do other things. So, it certainly has a big impact whether or not he plays. Like I said, if Price is definitely going to be able to play, maybe Montembeault doesn't get a contract. Maybe they consider trading either Montembeault or Jake Allen. They don't need 3, but I think they might go into training camp with 3, even if Price is, indicating that he's going to try to play. Because Ken Hughes did say that certainly they're going to wait and see how his knee continues to respond to treatments. And, it's possible, too, that he could say, that he thinks he can play and he's going to give it a go. Kind of like what we saw with Tuukka Rask. He had a surgery last offseason, came back later, tried it a couple games, and he's like, no, I can't do this, and he retired. Right? So I don't know that that's going to happen, but it's just something that we could see, right? So we'll have to see, but it just kind of gives us a more definitive timetable on when we should expect Price news and when the team will obviously want to know. But speaking of Montreal, there's certainly a few more names surfacing in the rumor mill that could find themselves on the move this offseason. We do know of a few other players within Montreal that we've talked about before, like Jeff Petrie. Basically didn't really, demand a trade, but kind of indicated he would welcome it to get a fresh start and to get back to the U.S. Now he's kind of seems to have a change of heart. Basically, he said he was okay if he stayed at this point. You have to think that there's some other veteran guys that could be moved because there's certainly going to be, whether you want to call it a rebuild, retool, whatever. But Christian Dvorak's name and Yoel Armia's name is certainly starting to surface there again. Now, in the case of Dvorak, there's an article in Montreal Hockey Now talking about the fact that Dvorak's name was in play before the deadline. But of course, nothing happened. His numbers under Dominic Ducharme were really disappointing. He's another player like Caulfield and others that responded better to Marty St. Louis and certainly improved. But if they're going to be able to take Shane Wright at first overall, they have Nick Suzuki. There's probably your top 2 centers longer term. They have enough other guys like in the system, like Jake Evans, Ryan Poehling, and a few others here that they don't necessarily need all those centers. So like either they move some of those centers to be wingers, or they could consider trading somebody. And if they can get a good enough return on Dvorak, then maybe they pull the trigger. Certainly his value would have bounced back a little bit after finishing strong compared to how he started. And at that point, it's believed, based on the article, it kind of looked around and speak to a couple of NHL sources that they have, and said that they talked to a few people to get an idea what the return could be, and it could be a late first rounder or possibly a second or third rounder in our prospect. So it could be a good future based asset return for Montreal if they do decide to pull the trigger. I know before the deadline there was even some rumblings of maybe having him go back to Arizona, but I don't know if there was much to that or not. It's just something that I had heard briefly back, a couple of weeks leading to the deadline, but I'm not sure if there's anything to that or not. But Yoel Armia now is another player who has a little bit of term left on his contract, and certainly you could argue that doesn't necessarily fit into a rebuild for you, but has gained attention with some strong play with Finland at the World Championships. He had a really solid tournament. The Finns won gold. Armia played really, really well, and his value is kind of boosted up too. So it's a couple of veteran guys that they could move out for a decent return based on what they've been able to finish their season strong here. So we'll see what the Habs do. Certainly a few more players to kind of keep in mind here that could be on the move. Now, when it comes to a couple of the names to watch, one in Los Angeles, according to Athletic writer Lisa Dillman, she fully expects them to trade top center prospect Gabe Vilardi this offseason. He's been in the system now for some time, dealt with some pretty serious injuries before, so his development was certainly stalled, but it's at a point now where he's been playing in the solid now for a couple of years, consistently at least. But the Kings I think they have so many prospects that they just don't view him as highly as they used to. So they're probably going to be looking to move him to get a fresh start. Hard to say what kind of return could be. They have so many prospects that I would think that they probably aren't necessarily looking for another one in return. Wouldn't be surprised to see a few of the prospects get moved either for a higher impact player, possibly a top 6 forward. That's not something that would surprise me at all. Elliot Friedman was talking today as well about some potential RFAs that are not going to be qualified. He said that he's hearing that teams are a little bit, slower than usual to talk about free agents on their own teams because they're curious what else might be out there, because there's expected to be a higher than normal group of RFAs that don't get qualified, that teams might be backing out some of these offers and making some of these players UFAs at a much younger age than they were expecting. One of the names he throws out there is Dylan Strome. So I know he's been in the rumor mill off and on for quite some time. So we will see. Instead of being traded by the Blackhawks now, he could end up in a situation where he's not qualified and just goes somewhere else as a free agent. So we will see, but it'll be an interesting time to see who is not getting their QO to be able to stay with their existing clubs. Now, could we also see a deal between Vancouver and Pittsburgh? There's still more rumors about John Marino and the interest in Vancouver to bring him in. Of course, Jim Rutherford's a big fan, which is where most of this kind of stems from. There's also belief that maybe Vancouver might be interested in Kasperi Kapanen too. We know Kapanen is definitely a player the Penguins, I think, would be open to moving. When it comes to Marino, I think a lot of that is going to depend on the future of Chris Letang. If they can get him re-signed, then I think trading Marino is a much more real possibility. If they lose Letang in free agency, they're probably going to want to hang on to him, being a right-shot defenseman and does have some offensive upside. He's going to probably get a bigger role with Pittsburgh if Letang is not in the picture. So I would think that would be something that would likely not happen. But there seems to be continuously in the rumor mill coming up about Vancouver having interest in Marino. Then I've seen an article today about, well, maybe there'd be a Marino Kapanen package. I don't know what the return could be, if that's really something Vancouver would be interested in. I know there was some talk about them finding some space, whether it be through Connor Garland, JT Miller, but I don't know if any of those players would really be what Pittsburgh wants, so I don't really know how that trade would look, but don't be surprised if you continue to hear Marino to the Canucks if Letang is re-signed, because Rutherford is obviously the president there, big fan of Marino, and feels like he could help his team. But if Marino comes into the Vancouver Canucks, you would think they'd almost have to move Tyler Myers, and that might not be the easiest thing to do. And I don't really see Pittsburgh taking him, especially if Letang is there. That probably wouldn't work, so I don't know what would happen in that regard. It would be complicated to do. It might not be something that we see happen, but there is apparently some interest and conversations could be taking place here before the draft. So let me know your thoughts on that as well. And everything else today down in the comments we'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.